they are also after to be able to make the notes.
Okay.
Have fun.
So, another month. It was a longer month than usual because of the Christmas break. So, Happy New Year, everyone. So, we have two discussions that we opened last time on contributors for public review. We also had a new preset proposal for binary integer literals, which we'll briefly mention. And then we're going to assign the next round of reviews. So first, I'm going to get the binary integer literals done. So here it was commented on the contributors thread. Doesn't really fit our criteria for inclusion in 3.0 at this time anymore. The only
So the criteria are that it will be a breaking change or something that affects the books or could be critical in some way, basically.
Yeah. So
it's not like it's not good.
It's something that
essential.
We could definitely do later without breaking anyone or without making the beginner stuff easier or anything. So it's simply delayed until 3.1 for that reason. No, irrespective of the benefits of said proposal. The only reason we might still discuss it if it interacts with the custom integer literals, the numeric literals, which we have not discussed yet, and we will discuss in the future.
There's a documentation page in the Doki website about that
one. Okay, so let's move to the public thread on open classes. So I'm going to first summarize a little bit what happened on the contributors threads. There were there's one comment by Till initially, can we make it an error instead? So it's difficult. It might be too strict right now, but it could be in the future. There were again renewed comments on it's a departure from Scala's default that things are public and open in general. I answered that again it's a question of difficulty of reasoning. Reasoning with public immutable members is easy, and so we can make that public by default. But reasoning with the extension contract of a class is very difficult, and creating a proper extension contract is very difficult as well. So it should not be the default that classes are open by default. I also just now had the idea that we can make a parallel here with mutable states. It's more difficult to reason about mutable states, and that's why mutable state is not our default for idiomatic Scala. And since it's also more difficult to reason about extension contracts, that should also not be our default. There was comments by Hari that we already have basically abstract classes and the override modifier. But that kind of sidesteps the fact that it doesn't it does not address the same use cases. First, there are use cases for completely concrete classes that are open and where things can be overridden with a clear contract. I have several of those in my code base. I think I answered with a comment pointing to one example. And override is simply the thing that you have to write if you want to override a method, but it's also the thing that you use to make sure that you are actually overriding a method and not declaring a new overload, which would completely change the semantics of the thing. There were concerns that language imports don't actually work. because people just write them in to silence the compiler warnings, or IDEs even fill them in because why not? I mean, IDEs are good at silencing warnings, so at fixing the code, basically. Arguably, they shouldn't do that. It should be a conscious decision. I mean, the whole point is that you have to feel the pain of writing this thing because we think it's the wrong default, basically. And then I think the last big thing, which I want to, there was one comment on why not open on each member instead, rather than the class. I think we can possibly rediscuss this, assuming the whole thing gets general approval. But the main the main comments that gained some favor was, since this is mostly for library authors, then let's make this opt-in and have an annotation at open instead, and then let's not bother application writers, and instead let library authors use this if they want. To that, I think Martin wants to say something.
Yeah, so I think we should. That doesn't make the language simpler. To have essentially opt-ins and nodes. So I think we should have the right default and stick with it, and not for me modifiers are a cop out. They're sort of a way to sort of say, well, we haven't really added to the language. It's just an annotation, and
you mean annotations?
Annotations are a cop out. Yeah. So I think we should stick with it and say, well, it is a modifier. And if we want to change the default of classes to be essentially sealed without the trustivity checks, then there must be a modifier way to override the default and get back to essentially the old behavior. So that's why I would work for open as it is.
Okay. Does anyone else want to comment on that? I mean, I agree with anything that's in favor of open classes, because
any version is fine.
I actually think they are what I. So basically, I think the change to, or the comparison with mutation is actually quite good to say, well, mutation is another thing you want to control, and also of course override. So if you change a method, then we have an explicit opt-in for that. So there is precedent, and I believe that by now we have learned that sort of this ad hoc overriding of any or extension of any class out there is actually a bad idea. And I think there should be sort of a clear boundary, and I believe final is just not flexible enough.
But at the same time, the boundary of the food file is also makes it flexible.
It's arbitrary, but it's important to have something that works. You can argue. I mean, better is the enemy of good. You can argue whether it should be the package or should it be the file. Arguably, we have sealed already. People are used to that, so essentially making the default basically sealed without the trustivity check is reasonable.
But there are usability problems with it. You get to the situation, so you want to fix things and you can't. I mean, we had that situation in Liberty Library recently.
Yeah.
So there will always be problems with any default, right? Like there's always going to be that 20% of code. I think the real question is, what is 80% of code, right? Like that's when you're picking the default. I think it's more common that you want people to add final or control, like the extension of their class when they write Scala code, than they do now.
Yeah.
And giving them something that's like intuitive as a default that doesn't let them run into those corner cases, I think is really what we're going for here. Kind of similar to, if you write the laziest possible way that you can, what do you get in Scala, right? And is that code going to survive long? So think of it more from like people coming into a code base new and typing things out fast. And then the advanced controls are like, okay, can we get around situations where the default isn't good? So like, yes, we'll run into corner cases. The question is, are you running into them all the time? Or are you running into them like just those few cases where you really are in the corner?
Yeah, I think it's quite common, like in application code, just to have some class, some base class, and then you have some other class that extends those. And then as soon as you do that in different files, which is a common thing, you are going to hit that thing and you say, okay, now I have to put this open thing.
But that's okay.
Well, see, it's kind of weird because maybe you don't actually want this thing to be open to others, so you have to say, oh, well, okay, I'm going to put open class, but then I'm going to put like a private constructor.
Then I would argue that it's good that the language forces you to think about what you're doing. Like,
isn't it weird that you can have an open class with a package private constructor?
No,
it's like it's open, but actually it's closed.
Yeah, sure. I mean, why not?
I think there's a big step of you hacking out 3 lines maybe in the program, class A, class B extends A, class C extends A, and the compiler saying, no, you have to put open in here. I really would be annoyed by that because, hey, I mean, the compiler, I've written 3 classes, to extend the first one, you can deduce yourself that it's open. And the other is the step to actually know, now we split it into separate files and things like that. So I think it's reasonable that the compiler will demand a bit more decorum and ceremony in that case for these things. I wouldn't mind so much, but I would definitely mind in the single file case. So if you have to put open in there would be counterproductive. I want to write the simplest possible code and have it mean something reasonable. That's sort of the thing. But I mean, one could, I think there are good reason to make open sort of package visible or sealed, and it's a bit arbitrary, but I think sealed has going for it that there's precedent. So we have that already. People are used to it.
So speaking of which, there was questions about what's the difference now between the defaults with no keywords and sealed. So what I would answer to that is that in practice, there are 2 things that change. First, the default. If you let it be the default, then you can actually extend it somewhere else if you tell the compiler, yes, please let me extend this class anyway, even though it's not meant to. And the other reason, which is more long-term, because is the difference is if you sealed brings exhaustivity. So a class that is explicitly sealed is the point is that you get exhaustivity checking when you do pattern matching on it, and when you write an API with a sealed class, it's a promise that actually you expose the exhaustivity and that the exhaustivity itself is part of the API. So this is an additional contract that you give to your clients, that they can pattern match over all the cases in an exhaustive way. Whereas if I have a default thing, so that is not open and not sealed, I cannot extend it from somewhere else, but I also don't receive the guarantee that I can pattern match over it exhaustively.
So we need the keyword sealed anyway because abstract classes and traits are by default open, always open. So we have to assert the sealedness explicitly.
Yeah.
So that means we can't get rid of. Introducing open doesn't mean we can drop sealed. We need sealed anyway, and then the question is, should be basically the default then be the same as sealed, but there are reasons to say the default should not cover exhaustivity because that would be a big breaking change. That's the other thing, that it would suddenly introduce exhaustivity checking for a lot of classes that were not intended for it.
It also goes against the library author use case, which is because if if you give to users something that is sealed, you are promising something.
Yeah.
You are promising that you will not add or remove a case.
Yeah. Right, and you want
and
you
you
want
don't want to. You want the default to
But-
be, I'm not
but are
promising
you-
anything.
yeah.
Are you actually promising that? Because I do think people change hierarchies over time. I mean, it is a breaking change, right? But I
Well,
don't
every
know if I
breaking
buy.
change- every breaking
I'm just saying I
change-
don't know that I buy that sealed means I'm not going to add a thing to it,
and-
or if I do, I'll be very clever about it.
Well, I mean, you said yourself, it's a breaking change. Just by that definition, you are saying, I have broken some expectation. The expectation was, I'm not going to add a case.
Usually,
I agree
though,
with Josh. Is that was never the expectation in the first place? It's but when you declare something sealed, you're saying, if anything, it's the opposite. It's saying I can safely add cases to this because the compiler will tell you about my new cases.
Yeah, but
Yeah.
we have separate compilations, so
yeah, right. But if you look at any pattern match library out there that is designed for binary compatibility, right? Like look at what's done for reflection in Dotty. You're not providing those sealed cases. You're providing a set of matchers that you support, that people can make use of, and that allows you to add cases. Like you need the ability to add cases in the evolution of the library. So I don't think sealed implies that at all. And I don't think we should encourage the community to assume that sealed implies that either. I think that could be dangerous. I think if you want to provide a pattern matchable library, the reflection library, it provides a good example of what you actually need to do to be able to extend and change the shape of that tree over time. I don't think we really want to encourage sealed.
I think this is different. The reflection library does that because it doesn't want to expose the actual implementation and wants you to be able to use pattern matching over things that are basically abstract types. That's where this thing comes from. But if I define an ADT, right, that is meant for pattern matching with concrete things, I am exposing the sealedness. I am exposing the fact that people can reliably pattern match on this thing and cover all cases.
Mm-hmm.
And well, now it becomes a judgment call. But I think if you do sealed stuff that then you add cases to it, you're doing it wrong. But maybe I'm the only one thinking like that. But in my libraries, I've stopped a long time ago using sealed as if I'm not promising that you'll get exhaustivity from that.
Mm-hmm.
Instead, I use a private constructor.
And you can add a case, but you have to dump the major version of your library.
Yeah,
You
exactly.
You broke compatibility.
You broke compatibility. Just as much as if you remove the method.
It's interesting what William said about the relationship between extending a class and constructing a class, because you first restrict someone's ability to extend a class, and then you can later restrict someone's ability to construct a class. So I definitely do think that like for example, the warning setup that we have for open classes should take, for example, the accessor modifier of the constructor into account. If I open the construction of a class to my package, for example, then sort of package level open. But more than that, I was thinking, what if? And this is kind of, maybe I should put it on the thread instead. But I was thinking about the public as a modifier instead. Because that is basically what you're doing. You're saying this class can be extended by anybody. Like I'm allowing that to happen. Maybe it feels more natural. And then I was wondering whether that should be on the constructor or on the type itself. Anyways, I'll put it on the thread.
Well, public would be very reminiscent of public in other languages and would mean what is the accessibility make its access, and that's that would be a very bad cure, I think.
I mean, open is established in other languages.
Yeah.
Open classes.
I mean, arguably public could be for the constructor itself, but the syntax for annotating constructors is quite arcane, and usually beginners don't know how to do that. So.
But then they don't write inheritance contracts either.
No, but they do write quick one-off inheritance in their application, and we don't want. I mean, I wouldn't want them to have to learn the annotated constructor syntax just to be able to extend a class.
Without a warning.
Sorry, what?
Sorry, I said without a warning because it would just
without
just
a warning. Yeah. Okay. So what next?
So what's the implementation status? I know, but we don't have a warning by default in that way. If you don't have an open class in that way, you need dash strict or something.
Yeah, it's under strict. I think that would mean 3.1. But that's sort of migration configuration. I think so. The docs should say it.
Because the current default is kind of the outcome that some people are arguing for, like have a flag to make it strict. And
well, not really, because it's a use site strictness, and the alternative that people are suggesting is a declaration site opt-in, which is more interesting. At least the opt-in at declaration sites fits the library author use case.
Yeah.
It does not address Martin's comment that, and more than a comment, like his reason for this, which is we should encourage beginners not to do this, or to be explicit about it if they want to do this, because we want them to think about it. Also, we say everywhere that we should favor composition over, and that we have exports now instead of.
Do we want beginners to use export instead of extend?
I think that's actually well. We'll see. We need to get more experience.
Yeah.
It would be pedagogical to not do extension, to teach them export first.
I wonder what happens.
We're going off on a tangent. So. My main concern is I want basically to be able to teach the simplest possible class syntax, so just like class true, and make it mean something that's reasonable and persistent.
But you have to teach the open modifier.
At some point, yeah, if you say you want to extend it in another file, then it has to be open. Yeah. Right. But the question is, what is the default? What is the right default? And I believe we've sort of come around from when Scala was designed, where sort of ad hoc extensions were all the rage, to something now where we sort of find this basically abhorrent and saying, oh, this has to be planned. And this could be sort of constructed even sort of as a point of, as a typo in Scala, like let's do these things. So I think open is sort of a way to nudge the focus a little bit more towards safety, and to avoid having to give the advice, please people put final on all your classes or all your case classes and these things, which is sort of what I would want to avoid, because that's sort of the wrong kind of things. The language should not sort of have guidelines that says you have to use any modifiers on this thing because otherwise it's not professional.
Yeah, so basically if common advice of good practice says you should add these keywords, then it means that's not the right default. Yeah, that's what you're saying.
Exactly.
So yeah, it's interesting to check with those people if they're actually satisfied with open now. You don't think it's good enough. So, but some people do like 3 abstract case class.
So my empirical thing is people seem to sort of, but on these web discussions you have invariably people who sort of criticize, because if you agree, why would you talk? But the sort of the critiques fell sort of fairly evenly divided into people who said, I want it to be stricter and I want it to be less strict. The other thing is that I believe that we sort of can look at what Kotlin did here, so it did open, and essentially the fact that they have open is actually not felt. I have the impression that most people in Kotlin feel that's actually a good thing, but they do complain about mocking and essentially some specialized use cases. And all these we have actually addressed. So we could say, well, we basically we do it at Kotlin, but we do it right.
So the Kotlin solution is they have a compiler plugin to make open by default when you compile your code. And people use that with Swing, no, not Swing, sorry, with the other web framework. Spring.
Yeah.
Yeah,
that's pretty horrible. Yeah, okay. Yeah. So,
maybe
yeah, so that's a good argument that maybe they went too far.
Okay, let's see. Should we take a straw poll with the committee members think? So let's see who would as a straw poll. It's not a definitive thing, because we would need to vet the exact texts and figure out things like feasibility and stuff like this. But who would be in favor? So Adrian, is there? We have 4 in the room. Dale is a no.
I'm unsure. Martin has at least convinced me that I need to do this another round of reading the discussion and thinking. So I'm really, I don't know which way to vote at this rumble.
Okay, Dale, that's a no.
No, I'm not a member.
Oh, true. Sorry. And Josh?
Yeah, so I would be in favor. I think there's a few things to pick at here that if it's not a clean thing, then I think that would be my only fear, right? I think the default, the idea of this is correct. I'm just worried about some of the nuanced specifics and whether or not we can get a good implementation so it feels good.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Okay.
I should maybe add, I'm strongly in favor of changing the default for case classes. The big question for me is whether to do it more broadly.
Okay. So
so the proposal as implemented, as you said, is like doesn't warn at all in 3.0.
Yeah.
And will warn in 3.1.
Yeah, that's
yeah, but that's
I think. Well, personally, I would move a bit the agenda here and do it right away, but I don't have a strong feeling about it.
We have a sort of meta principle that we want to support cross compilation between 213 without warnings, and that means
No, I think as long as we eventually have it, I'm fine.
I mean, the other thing is with 3.0, you will actually have the option to sort of have, turn the source to 3.1. So right now you do that by giving the option minus strict, but I think we're going to change it and just say source to 3.1, and then so if you feel like it, you can have it from now on.
Yeah. Okay. Then let's move to the next topic, which is explicit nullability. So there were less comments in terms of number of comments, but some were longer and more developed. So actually, of course, there are more things to talk about here. So here is a small summary. So One thing was asking to better specify or document flow typing specifically, but in general the rest of the proposal to say where things work, when things don't work so well. Right now the text of the proposal is mostly focused on the things that do work well. For example, when flow typing is actually able to figure things out, but doesn't expose the limitations quite in the same way, and that we should definitely elaborate. Another clarification, large-scale clarification request was to compare this with platform types of Kotlin. So one major comments that I posted, but I will spell out this time, is that basically the unchecked null is the same idea as Kotlin platform types, and we are using a union with or null instead of using a specific question mark notation, simply because we have union types and we have a null type. And given those things, it's the obvious way to model nullability is to use a union type with null as one of the alternatives. And that unchecked null is actually importing in that framework the same idea as platform types do for Kotlin. However, we do agree that there might be some differences in the tricky details, and that it would at some point take the time to make a good comparison of the two systems. There were a lot of other comments in general to document these things better, and to have more to clarify more in general what this is going to break. How much do we expect to use .nn in the code to cast away the nullability? And I mean, all these things are, I think, very valid questions that we can only answer with more experimentation. At this point, I think it's worth for people who are interested in this proposal to try it out and see how much works well, how much breaks in their code base, and report on that. That would be extremely valuable. There's a reason we have a compiler where we can solve merge things fairly easily to get it in the hands of people so that they can try it. Yeah. Because we can only do so much in terms of experimentation. But then there are enough concerns at this point that we think that clearly the proposal is not done. It requires more work. There are implementation concerns with how unchecked null is currently handled, which have consequences on what programs are valid and stuff. There are other paths toward handling Java interrupt. It could be so. Experimentation at this point would be very, very valuable. It's, I think, very good that we have a working implementation that people can play with, and it would be very good to play with it now.
Yeah. Also, I should say that one of the original authors of the pull request, Darius Sau, he will spend a year here on the master, and probably one half of it as a research intern. so my intention is to have him sort of continue to work on this.
Good. That's,
Yeah, he'll come in mid-February, very soon.
okay.
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Anyone wants to make any other comments on the explicit nullability thing?
So I just want to restate that. So essentially, it's the things that are often glossed over, but which are then in the end really hairy. And I think that's essentially the analog of platform types, because basically that's sort of the sticky point. How do you deal with these things? And platform types, that's an easy word, but I would like to see what the definition and implementation, and I would so either there's something I overlooked or it's something really hairy. What these things are to specify and to implement. So we have to see what we can do analog. So the first thing that we had, which was just an alias of unchecked null. To say unchecked null is like null, it's an alias, but there's an annotation that it's unchecked. That I believe we found out by now that doesn't actually work. That's too ambient, so it goes away too quickly. It's hard to actually figure out when it has these things and when not, and it's not intuitive at all. That certain things work and other things don't work, and it's because the type inferencer has stopped the annotation. So that's sort of the things where I believe there's a long end of complexity there. So I wouldn't underestimate it.
Okay. Yeah. So yeah, I guess that's it for explicit nullability. So now we should move to what's next. So let's see what.
By the way, I moved the laptop closer because it seems the sound is actually coming from the laptop microphone, according to people on the internet.
Oh, I'm trying to follow the comments, but
no, it's on Gitter.
On Gitter. Okay.
Secret chat.
There hasn't been any comment on YouTube, so yeah, I was following that. Oh, that's bad. Well,
okay.
No point trying to change it now.
Yeah.
Okay, so who wants to champion what's next?
What's next?
What's next? Yeah. What proposal? What other proposals should we open for next time?
So we already have one. We said the main stuff.
So @main was introduced last time, but it wasn't posted on contributors. So it's rescheduled for this time.
Okay. We should probably find a couple others.
Yeah. So
let's see, what should we do?
There was someone for enums earlier.
Josh.
Just trying to see what
you released Josh.
Yeah, I signed up for it just recently. Like when we were talking before the meeting of things we'd like to do. Yeah. So, I can take enums and post to the thread and see what people want to talk about. If I recall correctly, you meant there's like two odd areas with it. One is what comes back from type of, and the other thing is its interaction with Java enums. Is that correct? The things that we need to discuss?
Yeah, the main things are what's the type of sum of 5, basically.
Yeah,
is it sum of int or is it option of int?
There's a few other things. There's a Dotty issue, which is issue 7501. I'm going to link to it. Yeah, so there was like concerns about the toString on enums, because when you override the toString of the enum, you end up overriding the toString of each case of the enum, which might not be what you want. Oh no, yeah, right, no, because if you override at the enum level, then each case still overrides that toString. So it doesn't pick you or avoid them to string. So there's a few
So,
things like that.
yeah,
There was
that's
some
the behavior of
Yeah.
object methods, basically.
there was like the behavior of the values thing in the companion, whether there's like a Scala support class for enums, because right now we have scala.enum, which conflicts with Java long enum.
Yeah.
So there's
So I guess a question I have here is how much of this how much of these are bugs and how much of these are like we need to make sure are in the spec, because a lot of these look kind of like things that might need to go into the spec but would be bugs, right? So we implement what the spec says, but like the actual behavior of it might need to also be spec'd.
So I think most of these things are as like the spec already specifies how this stuff works, and we should change the spec and change the implementation.
Okay.
I think the critical one is really the type issue, whether we have type widening or not.
Yeah.
So that's the
And
one which is
yeah, and on the Dotty side, when we discussed it, we were mostly in favor of dropping the apply on the companion, which gives the widen type, because it's too confusing.
Yeah. Originally, it was introduced because people were clamoring that basically some should return option and not some, because they said we want something which is like an algebraic data type and not arbitrary subtyping. So that was the original motivation. But it's true that whatever you have, that basically the comments are could always go in the other direction. I'm willing to bet you if we change it, then the other half will come out of the woodwork and say, how could you want our ABTs? So,
of course, but at least it gives you the subtype thing has going for it that it is what we have now.
It is what we have now.
So the issues with it are well understood, and we know how to deal with them.
And I'm still hoping we could like do some typing constraints to make this less complicated for people. Widen them the same way we widen units, basically. But that's that's fair.
Okay.
Anyway, so enums for next time.
Enums,
Anything else? Adrian? Want to do one?
I signed up for an expert, but I don't know if I can get that done for next time.
Okay. It's mostly opening at this point. It's mostly opening the thread and contributors,
but I
and
need to do
then
some soul searching whether I'm in favor or against.
well, not really. For this time, it's just
you can be a neutral observer.
The facts
Yeah, but the way I phrased it, I'm just I can do the thread.
Good. Adrian is doing the thread for exports. Excellent. Okay, that's 3. That's actually pretty good. So, okay.
3 is fine. Okay, cool.
Any other business?
I don't know whether we should talk about the tasty thing or not.
Yeah, I think since we still have 15 minutes, we can introduce the tasty stuff. So this is not really a SIP at the moment, but in my opinion, it should become one. So, as you know, Tasty is this new serialization format for typed abstract typed abstract syntax trees. Except it isn't, in my opinion. If you watched my talk at what was it, Scalasphere, you might already understand some of what I'm talking about. I think the fact that it's a binary format to serialize typed abstract syntax trees is actually a fairly minor implementation detail. And that instead we should think of Tasty as an independent language that has a specification. And that is our golden standard for what Scala is and what Scala means. And following that, what it means for compatibility in the future. So currently, our artifacts are basically binary artifacts with the JVM bytecodes, and that's ultimately what Scala means. Like this is the behavior. This is what specifies the runtime operations of Scala. And when we think about compatibility of libraries, we think in terms of that, in terms of binary compatibility. We have tools to check that, like NEMA and stuff like that. But we want to turn this a bit around and use Tasty for that purpose. And I don't think we can do that if we don't start thinking about Tasty as an independent language with a spec, and where we can actually reason about Tasty as its own thing, and then Scala would be compiled to Tasty, really, and that is the semantics of things. That is how we can reason about what a program is and what it does, and that is what we can reason about in terms of compatibility also in the future. So that, of course, would require some delicate and difficult work of going through the whole thing and specifying it, removing all the weird implementation details that are still into it, like the fact that default getters are there, the fact that super accessors are there, the fact that random flags have to be on some members and or not, and we don't really know which ones on what.
No one knows.
What members what synthetic members are present at the Tasty level and what are generated later. And I think it's very important that we get this right.
Yeah. So I agree with everything you said, which is why I'm confused, because you said so Tasty is not a type of Spike syntax tree.
No, that's really an implementation detail.
I mean, it's an IR. Is that
no,
okay?
That's also an
because
implementation
I don't see a difference between like a target language and an IR.
So the difference between a target language and, well, it's not a, target.
I think you're arguing semantics at this point. I think
it's
what Seb is saying is not that important the way it's represented in binary.
Sure.
The important is like,
or that it's a typed AST for that matter.
which is also a representation.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Talking more about the semantics is important, and I think like another large part that you didn't mention is the spec of the JVM that we're currently implicitly relying on for defining what compatibility is.
But that's
in
inevitable.
for example.
But the JVM is specified.
Yeah.
And
So we can rely on.
I'm saying like if you want to decouple that, you have to duplicate that whole effort, which is a huge
we
thing.
should decouple to a large extent these things. It's fair to say that, well, for the primitive operations on primitive data types, refer to the JVM. It's the same.
No, I'm talking specifically about the things that NEMA enforces essentially.
Oh yeah, that we have to
it's
get
all doable,
right.
but I'm like, well, I should start by saying I agree. I think this is all great, but it's a huge effort.
It's a huge effort, but it might also be the most long-lasting benefit that we would get.
Well, so one thing to look at it is that
Adrian, can you get closer to the mic?
No.
He said no.
Don't want this to be recorded. I was just saying I like all this, but I just wanted to underscore, the magnitude of the effort. Like right now we rely a lot on the JVM language spec and what binary compatibility means. I mean, I totally agree with just thinking of Tasty as a language and like a small language that's well defined and has a very tight spec. But maybe we can think about it more as something that we need to do by the time we freeze it. And in the beginning, it's still evolving. But I feel like discussing this now is kind of
it's a huge effort.
Yes,
it's worth.
If there's the bandwidth, we should start obviously as soon as possible.
Thinking about this now, and at least agree or disagree that it's worth the effort.
No, I completely agree. For years.
Yeah, I mean, I think the design of that should already be taken into account. I assume that's the way we're thinking about it. The fact that it needs to be compact and so on is important for other reasons, but not for the stability ones that we care about.
Yeah. So an important consideration here is like, how much do we want to commit two things for 3.0 versus 3.x for some x. Because if we break binary compatibility of the standard library in a future version of Scala, then we might as well break Tasty because we won't get anything from previous binaries. So like one scenario will be like 3.0 has to be compatible with 2.13, so we do that anyway. And then we do 3.1 where we can redo some parts of the standard library, whatever. And when we do that, then we have to break Tasty. So maybe that's the point where we say, okay, then starting from now on, we don't break Tasty. Which will give us some more time to figure out what Tasty should have and should not have and other stuff.
I think the time to sort of start with it is now.
Yes.
Basically, we ship with something in 3.0, and then the first time we can possibly break it is 3.1.
Yes.
And then we better be right and not have to break it
Yes.
anymore. So basically, we have to be close by the time we ship 3.0.
Right.
I would be so bold as to say that when we break Tasty after 3.0, that's Scala 4.
We could correct that. I mean, just marketing at that point. Right?
Yeah.
So it doesn't matter.
It's sure. But it's marketing and it's not. It's also like if this is supposed to be the golden standard for stability of published artifacts, and we know that the ecosystem is mostly driven by what artifacts are compatible with each other. Then maybe we should start numbering versions of Scala according to that. And it's very possible that Scala 4 won't be such a big deal as Scala 3. Hopefully we won't.
No, but from my perspective, the thing is, so precisely because we intend Tasty to be very durable, to last for a long time, we have to sort of give ourselves the freedom to get it right until we can make that claim the first time. Because otherwise, if you say Scala 3 we ship that, and then a year later we ship Scala 4, then basically we've also devalued what a major version means. And they say, yeah, you're going to ship Scala 5 in another 6 months, like Java. Or
what is the value of a major version?
Yeah, no, I'm just saying that I think for Tasty we're really talking about epochs. So I would say that you want to keep it stable for at least 5 years or something like that, and then probably be backwards compatible still, or probably backwards compatible forever. So that's a rather big thing to achieve, and a rather big goal.
So that means keeping the standard library binary compatible for 5 years.
No, is it the binary? No, I'm not sure whether we want to include the standard library necessarily in that. Do we?
I think we do, because if you have a non-incompatible standard library, you can't really do much with existing artifacts.
Compatible, yeah, okay. Yeah, then it's a good motivation to keep the library small, yes.
Of course.
Yes.
I've said that for years.
Yeah.
So far we...
I mean, realistically, the ecosystem of Scala builds on what is the binary compatibility that the compiler gives you, and what is the same compatibility that the library gives you. You need those two things.
Yeah.
It's the least common denominator that the ecosystem actually rely on.
Yeah, but for the library we need one more jump, which is basically when we cut the compatibility to Scala 2.13, because that sort of freezes us into a fairly ad hoc thing now to say, well, it has to be Java bytecode compatible. And maybe at some point we can get Scala 2 also on Tasty, and then it's easier. But,
so I mean, at that point, it's true that if and when we're breaking the standard library, we might as well break Tasty at the same time. Like it's no cost basically for the ecosystem.
Okay. So that would mean that's then probably sometime.
Then the question is, what does that mean in terms of marketing? Is that 3.5 or is that 4?
Sorry, when you guys say tasty compatibility, is that bidirectional compatibility?
No, it's backwards tasty compatibility.
Okay, because Martin mentioned backwards compatibility. Sorry, backwards tasty compatibility in a potential Scala 4, which made it sound like the rest of the compatibility is bidirectional as forward and back.
No. Sorry, that's not what I meant. Yeah.
So the one concern that I have is what this means for downstream Java users of anything that uses Scala. Sorry, two things. One is that what I just mentioned. If things are sort of, they're no longer bytecode compatible, but they're sort of tasty compatible, then that's quite problematic for any downstream Java users that aren't using our tooling.
So, yes, I think it will still be worth thinking about binary compatibility for people for the standard library and for library authors that actually intend their libraries to be used by Java downstream users.
Yeah, so
the point
this is
we could it's worth thinking about it, and that could be a reason to bump your minor version, for example. And we could have tooling to reproduce up-to-date binaries from the tasty for downstream Java users and things like that. I'm not sure we are really ready, or even that this is the right forum to think about this. I think it's mostly a tooling issue, and it has.
So I think it's more than that, because I feel that it could be quite alienating for basically for the Java community, towards the Scala community. Maybe so far it's been okay because we've used bytecode as our form of compatibility. In the future, that will be unreliable, and so Scala anything derived from a Scala artifact or that transitively uses a Scala artifact, would be very problematic. And also, when you mentioned earlier about some libraries might target Java users and some might not. To some extent, that's true now. But if my concern about Tasty, although there's many things I like about it, I'm concerned that it will sort of further a divide between libraries that are Java friendly and libraries that don't care. And then a second point is around, we talk about tasty compatibility, and we talk a lot about the standard library, and obviously that's crucial. But the whole thing around tasty is also about other libraries. Some random foo library makes a change that bar library uses, and now it's no longer about bytecode compatibility, it's tasty compatibility. So there's breakages not just in standard library upgrades, but like anywhere in the graph.
There's no escaping December.
Well, on that note, it is 6 o'clock in Europe, so I think we'll have to wrap it here. We'll still have one online meeting before our retreat in March, which will probably be around end of February. And so we'll keep you posted on the contributors forums for the things we discussed earlier.
Okay.
And that's
Okay.
it.
Also, maybe one thing to wrap up the state of Given.
Wow, let's do it in 1 minute.
No, I just wanted to say so we still have an active comment thread out there. So.
And there's been an updated version of a proposal by Martin a week or 2 weeks ago.
Right.
So people are encouraged to go and voice their opinion on that.
So from my perspective, so we will have this in the next release, which is next week, and I would say let's give ourselves at least 6 weeks, so one release cycle to actually play with it. And during that time, I think comments are still invited, and we are open to people actually trying this out. But in my opinion, I would like to freeze it basically, hopefully after the next release, so in 7 weeks from now, something like that, because we also have to get to some fixed point at some point.
Okay. So thanks everyone. See you next time.
Thank you.
Let's see if I can end the meeting now. And,
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, cool. Thanks.
I think I did it. Hopefully not online.
Good. So that's
Exit.
Exit. Sounds good. Oh, this is